Okay, I've calmed down.
Have a good night.
I've calmed down just a bit from the insanity, the madness that was One Punch Man chapter 167. This chapter floored me on so many fronts. And if you don't know, boom, right here, Kingu-san channel, check out my live stream reaction to that chapter. Because reading that chapter, honest to God, I almost had a heart attack. Like, I was really close from being Naruto, Kage Summit, hyperventilating, just collapsing. Because what I was reading was phenomenal. Is. Not past tense, current tense, and even future tense. Was, is, and will be phenomenal. Forever and always. As long as there's no redraws. I mean, could you imagine a redraw? No. That would break my heart. If Murata and One Side actually redraw 160 keys. Yo. Easy. It almost fell down. That's not important. Listen, look here. There's no way. No redraws. Zero redraws, please, of this chapter. Maybe if you want to add a few extra scenes here for the volumes, okay, fine. But don't redraw the entire damn thing, please. That would kill me. Because this chapter is one of the few chapters I've ever given, seriously, an 11 out of 10. This is above and beyond perfection in my book. I did a first take video on this as well over here on this channel, why this chapter in my book is an 11 out of 10. Very few chapters I ever give an 11 out of 10. That is beyond yo. That is beyond amazing. That is baby oil status in my book. The hype, the intensity, the choreography, the story, the world building, the character, everything was there, and it was there in spades. My first take stance is still that. However, looking back on this chapter after almost 2 weeks, because the next chapter comes out, I think, in a few days' time from this video's recording, is this chapter still an 11 out of 10? Is this chapter still perfection, beyond perfection? There are a few things I can look at it from, let's say, a negative spin here. Just really two things, to be quite fair. Number one involves the artwork. So Murata is phenomenal when it comes to the artwork. We've seen the panels of God and Homeless Emperor. We've seen the panels of Psychos cutting off a piece of the planet. We have seen the panels of Monster Lord Orochi using a section of the Earth's core as an attack. Garo's Fajin, all that kind of stuff. Murata is amazing. The man even does GIFs. Saitama and Garo fighting in the clouds with that nuclear explosion. Yeah. The man's phenomenal. To this day, he is one of the best in business, top 10, top 5 mangaka in terms of artwork easily. However, the drawings of Jupiter and Io are not his work. Even though they are phenomenal and they're in this chapter, they're not his work. They actually belong to someone called Bekasaku on Twitter. And so Murata himself does actually shout at Bekasaku for doing this particular work when it comes to the oil colored pictures of the moon Io and Jupiter as well, watching, like looking at Io. So they're phenomenal pieces of art, but they are not Murata's work. So does that minus points for the chapter itself? I would argue no. No, it does not. However, as an artist, you can argue, even though Murata's phenomenal, he's like one of the greatest of all time, maybe calling him the GOAT, the cream of the crop, the number one of all time, you could argue, let's kind of hold that off for a second, okay? And I would argue it does not affect the chapter at all, knowing that he didn't make that artwork, but still, in the grand scheme of things, is he the best artist, the best mangaka out there? It's a harder fight to argue that he is, now that we know that that's not his work. But real quick though, Bekasaku may come back in the future and really pop off again in the manga, because we actually recently got these really gorgeous images of the cosmos with the new James Webb Space Telescope. And some of these shots of the cosmos with the infrared view are beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So I was talking about this with Thunderbird on Discord, and yeah, there's actually a pretty good chance in the future that these things may be drawn with oil paint by Bekasaku once again in the manga, because we all know that the cosmos plays a very big pivotal role in the story of One Punch Man. That's number one. Number two, we see in this chapter the resurrection of the Ginyu Force Guardians of the Galaxy, and we see their silhouettes, and they're virtually the same, which seems odd because there was a redraw of when Garo did the Fajin and that kind of stuff, where he actually uplifted the entire ancient continent, and we saw, initially, we saw Battle Beast, we see Boris, the cousin of Boros, and Elf Buki. And in this chapter, we see Battle Beast, we see Boris, but Elf Buki is now Amazonian Buki, a lot more wilder, the hair is like all over the place, a lot more intense, comparatively speaking. So instead of LARPing Lord of the Rings, she's LARPing Thundercats. So it feels kind of weird to have them be X'd from the story in a redraw for that previous chapter, but then they come back in this chapter. Huh? What? So that's weird, but does it affect the chapter in of itself? The answer is no, because it was a redraw. So the past material for the Ginyu Force Guardians Galaxy technically doesn't exist. So it's a bit of a loophole here where it doesn't really affect this chapter, but in the grand scheme of the story, let's say for the future in the anime or whatever the hell, that might be an issue, but probably not, because again, it's a redraw, and that past material shouldn't be in the, let's say, One Punch Man volumes coming up. It is there. So ultimately speaking, I'm giving this chapter still, even after a week plus out, this is still an 11 out of 10. This fight in terms of, and it's still ongoing, mind you, but in terms of an actual manga fight, this fight is still in my top 3 or top 5 favorite manga fights I've ever read. It's up there with Hoken versus Shin from Kingdom, and that's, I think, the best I've ever read in my life. And this fight is competing with that fight in terms of manga. And it's just so amazing. And I will say this too. After kind of looking at the panel, like the panel where we see the observable universe, just a hole, a void in the stars, I actually realized, based on upcoming panels in the same chapter, after Garo hits Saitama with the nuclear fission fist and the gravity knuckle, we do see a sort of black hole-ish effect around Io, and then we do see nearby galaxies. There are nearby galaxies near their solar system. So I'm gonna say what I said back then. You can easily argue that within this crazy wave of power that was the Serious Punch squared, they actually did go beyond the Milky Way galaxy, and they actually destroyed some of the galaxies within the local galactic group of galaxies, potentially going beyond that into the Virgo supercluster, and then the local superclusters, galaxies were gone. Yes. So at a minimum, in terms of power scaling, at a minimum, like this is being very, very baseline. We're really doing our best here to suppress this, okay? At a minimum, Saitama and Garo, and probably Saitama just by himself, can produce enough power to destroy hundreds or thousands of solar systems, like Cell on roids. But what's actually most likely is that, again, because we do see local nearby galaxies in the field of view of Saitama and Garo within this same chapter, we can easily say that at least 1 or 2 galaxies were in that wave. Therefore, Saitama and Garo, Saitama mainly, can produce enough power to destroy a galaxy with ease from deep range. So I would say galaxy plus level. And then really going above and beyond, that whole section of the observable universe just got wiped out. That's like max power at this point in time. And that to me is crazy. That to me is wild. And it's wild too, because normally we see the reverse, where we see the things being destroyed, and then we kind of view things from the aftermath. But in this situation, they already happened. And then now we have to kind of think, well, hold on, what is actually the scope here? And so it does add a lot of mystery and intrigue on what exactly is the scope of power we're talking about here for the Serious Punch Squared. Though to be fair, not even a full power Serious Punch Squared, because some of that damage was absorbed by Blast. Yo, my heart was pumping 1,000 miles a minute. I promise you, dude. I promise you. It was, I could power a local city with just how fast or how I was beating. And I gotta say this too, because this is such a powerful attack, it only makes sense now seeing the end of the chapter where Saitama has potentially bled for the first time in the series. That is actually arguably even more important than them wiping out that much of the galaxy, cosmos, the entire universe potentially, with the Serious Punch Squared. It's Saitama actually getting wounded. We'll see soon enough. But note to self here, it's on the heels of Garo mimicking Saitama. So essentially, at this point in time, it is only Saitama who can hurt Saitama, because Garo is Saitama when he copies Saitama, right? But keep in mind, of course, that Garo is just using a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the power of the big God itself. So this actually kind of validates here that the only real person that could probably have Saitama go all out genuine in a fight would probably be the big God. And what we see in the moon is probably not the God, because when we see the spinal cord of whatever's inside the moon, it seems to be bone and actual matter, rather than what Saitama, Flash, and the Monster saw in that pocket of space, where it seemed a lot more cosmic in nature. So there could be avatars upon avatars that God has littered throughout the entire cosmos, and that thing in the moon is just one of God's many avatars across the cosmos. And the biggest tell for this is actually Jupiter itself. The Eye of Jupiter is kind of watching Saitama and Garo fight on Io. And when we actually have Psychos gain her power from God for the first time, she even says the Eye of Jupiter. So there actually could be another avatar of God within Jupiter itself, within the prima gas giant of the solar system. Oh, there are so many dope possibilities for the future when it comes to the big God. So in terms of story, this chapter is outstanding. It honest to God is, especially when the Ginyu Force Guardians of the Galaxy, they come in there, they actually help out Blast, and they seemingly do the same thing that Blast can do, and they actually can divert that power, which shows you how powerful they are as a group. The story is muy bueno, very bueno. The character, just seeing Saitama hold on to Genos' core the entire time, I feel like in some crazy way, over the course of this fight, Saitama and Garo's actions are going to influence Genos' core in some ridiculous way, where in the future, Genos will be more powerful as a result of Saitama and Garo's actions. So Genos, best boy, I think may actually get a power-up. But I just love seeing Saitama really contemplate the dream that he's always had since the beginning of One Punch Man. Him having the chance to fight all out against a person for the first time in the entire series of One Punch Man, but choosing not to do it for his dude, Genos. That sorrow, that anguish, that rage, that bloodlust. And then Garo, who is right now away from planet Earth, wants to get back there because his dream is tied to that planet. Even though him existing there would literally end all life on the planet. There's layers to this on so many fronts that I do like a lot. And I just don't see how this chapter could be any lower than a 9 out of 10. Honest to God. Unless, let's say, people already had a dislike of this arc for some time, for whatever reason. And or this is so far removed from the webcomic. Because in the webcomic, Saitama is not table flipping the moon of Io into oblivion. And that serious Tale panel, by the way, is so good. It's so beautiful.
I think I'm losing my mind.
But yes, I would say if there's any real hatred towards this chapter, it's probably because this chapter, in terms of power, deviates a lot from the webcomic. But I don't care about that. I don't give 3 dingleberries of an F. I really don't. I really damn don't. I am going to stick to what I said. I, honest to God, can only think of 2 things that are, quote, negative. And they're not even really that negative. So, this chapter, in my book, is going to stay an 11 out of 10. This chapter is perfection. Beyond perfection. And I don't give a damn. I do not care what anyone else has to say.